believe that BMW Z8 is fast approaching its 25th birthday. Those timeless 1950s style looks, that glorious BMW M5 Source V8, and the fact that it's one of the coolest James Bond cars of all time are just some of the many reasons why the Z8 is considered a very special chapter in BMW's history. This very car is now live on PistonHeads auctions, and I've no doubt it'll be inundated with bids. However, when it appeared in the 1999 James Bond film The World Is Not Enough, people just couldn't quite wrap their heads around it.
Remember to head over to pistonheads.com to research and buy your next car. The 2000s was full of reboots. Mercedes brought the Gullwing back with the SLS AMG, the Ford GT40 returned with more inches and fewer characters to its name, and BMW relaunched the Mini as a not-so-mini hatchback. However, the Z8 predated all of them. The Henrik Fisker design, inspired by the BMW 507 of the late 1950s, was both retro and contemporary, a look that shared nothing in common with other BMWs of the era. The reason why the Z8 looked so alien is because the 507 it paid homage to was a complete departure for BMW. It was designed to be a sales hit in the US, but was ultimately too expensive to export in the huge numbers needed to keep the bean counters happy, and was ultimately scrapped with just 252 examples sold, one of which wound up in the hands of Elvis Presley.
So you can see where the confusion stemmed from. This was an homage to a car that in its time didn't look like anything else BMW had made, and was one that people didn't really remember. But thank goodness they went ahead with it, because in the metal this thing is utterly beautiful. The horizontal style grills, those gorgeous wing vents, and the minimal rear end, all of it harks back to the 507, as does this very upright windscreen and the excessive use of chrome. People say this is the most beautiful BMW of the modern era. And you know what? I think I agree.
While the look was distinctly retro, the Z8's underpinnings were anything but. Much of the bodywork was made from aluminium, draped over a space frame chassis for a curb weight of just 1,585 kilograms. Then there's the engine, which is the same S62 4.9 litre V8 used in the E39 M5, the most powerful production engine available to BMW at the time. Like the M5, it develops 400 horsepower, which it sends exclusively to the rear wheels through a 6-speed manual gearbox. Alpina launched an auto version in 2003, only it got rid of the M-tuned S62 and replaced it with the standard BMW M62 V8 instead.
Just as astounding is the interior. It's a real mashup of retro and modern in here, with this open, minimal dash that matches the exterior colour just like it did on the 507. And what's really hard to believe is that almost everything in here is bespoke to the Z8, including this gorgeous 50s style steering wheel and even most of the switchgear. It must have cost BMW an absolute fortune to develop this car. It didn't, however, develop a right-hand drive version of the car. So yes, although I'm sat on the left-hand side, this is a UK registered car. You may have noticed it's running on Alpina alloys wrapped in Continental tyres. More on that in a little bit. And it's also got a slightly fruitier exhaust, which sounds a little something like this.
Just like the owner of this Z8, you too can auction your car on PistonHeads. Just follow the link in the description, enter your details, and someone from our consignment team will get in touch. And be sure to register to bid too, because we have plenty of performance classic and collectible cars going under the hammer, including this stunning Z8. And here's why you should consider it, whether or not you're a Pierce Brosnan fan.
BMW's had its fair share of commercial flops. Just see the Z3 Coupe that we featured a few weeks back. And while the 507 is definitely among them, the Z8 was actually relatively popular. BMW sold 5,703 of these between 2000 and 2003, and nearly 50% of those were for the US market. It wasn't nearly as popular in the UK though. It's believed that fewer than 150 examples sold here, and I checked how many left just to see how many were registered in the UK today, and it's fewer than 50. So why wasn't the Z8 as popular as it was in other markets? Well, a big part of it was that the steering wheel was on this side of the car, and that's always going to work against it. But the other reason is that UK journalists just were a little bit lukewarm to it. Couldn't really figure out what it was. Was it an M car? Was it a roadster? Was it the big brother of the Z3? It just didn't make sense because it was so out of context with everything else BMW was producing. The thing is, it was sort of all of those and none of them at the same time. The reason it had an M engine is because that was the most powerful thing BMW could get its hands on. But the dynamics of the car were a lot more laid back. The suspension is pliant and soaks up bumps beautifully. Now that does come at the expense of a little bit of texture, but it feels really very comfortable and smooth from where I'm sat. You also don't have that razor sharp steering that you'd get in an M car either, and that's why some reviewers claimed that the Z8 felt a little bit numb. It weights up nicely and just encourages you to drive it in a slightly more laid back manner. And that's what the Z8 wants you to do. It wants to be driven at 8/10. It's not like an M car where you need to grab it by the scruff of its neck and get every last ounce out of it. That being said, it's really very fast and makes a fantastic noise. It feels so much faster than the M5. Even though this is the E39 engine, it feels light and it feels like it just wants to take off the moment you hit the accelerator. And that's just with the car in its standard mode. If I hit the sport button down here, the throttle response is so much snappier. Oh, what a glorious engine. I thought it was magnificent in the E39, but in here it just feels even better. It does feel a little livelier than an M5 though. That has a limited slip differential, which we don't have here on the Z8. So it does mean that there's times where you might come out of a corner, put your foot down, and the rear end just tries to light up a little bit. Now this particular car is running Continentals, it's not on run flats, and that's really important because some of the early criticisms of the Z8 was that the ride was a bit all over the place, and some attributed that to run flats. Apparently the suspension was set up to work with just conventional tyres. BMW loves slapping run flats on everything and it completely mucked the ride up. But from where I'm sat, the Z8, it feels absolutely sublime. It just glides over the road with such effortlessness, just as a proper GT should. But what I found really quite astounding about this car is that, yes, it's nigh on 25 years old, but the moment I stepped into it and drove about 5 minutes down the road, I was just blown away by how unbelievably tight and fresh and modern everything feels in here. I feel like BMW could release this tomorrow and it feel like a brand new car. And I think it would have been received a lot better as well, because the Z8 was just ahead of its time. We weren't used to the retro reboot car back in the early 2000s. It just wasn't done. And that's the magical thing about this Z8, is that it feels more relevant now than it ever has. And because it's not filled with screens or dodgy old technology, it doesn't feel dated. There's a very good chance that your love of the Z8 spawns from the James Bond film. And apparently the producers of The World Is Not Enough, when they went to BMW to go and find their next Bond car, absolutely refused to take anything else. It had to be the Z8. Yes, the engine is a big part of the appeal, but it's just a joy to effortlessly thread through a set of corners. It really has stood up to the test of time well. And don't fret about owning a 25-year-old limited edition and mostly bespoke BMW, because apparently the company set aside 50 years worth of spare parts because they knew the Z8 would be a modern classic. So there's plenty of miles of V8 glory still left in it, and this one's done fewer than 18,000 miles. So go on, get yourself a bid in
and experience what one of BMW's most misunderstood models is all about. It really is as special as you think it is.